Okay, so Lola, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you are not understanding how to add and subtract polynomials given these algebra tiles. The first thing I want to show to you is that obviously some are positive and some are negative, which should be obvious based on the fact that some have a negative sign out front and some don't. The other thing that you should keep in mind is that the size of them is based on geometry, like finding the area of a square. This length is x, and this length is x, whatever x is. So x times x is x squared. Since this length is x, this length is also x, but this length is 1. So this is x times 1, or just x. And since we know that this distance is 1, and that's the same length, 1 times 1 is 1. So there's really three lengths we're talking about. Or sorry, two lengths we're talking about, x and 1, which create three different types of tiles. Since these are like terms, both have x squares, we can add them. Now, if you notice, they have one negative and one positive. That's why they cancel them out, because one positive and one negative cancel. That's an example where, scroll down a little bit, it looks like we're adding a negative and a positive. In addition to that, you could look and see, well, here's an x and a negative x, so that's an x up here. So it's like a negative x squared and an x. That's what's right here. Notice that this x, though, cancels out that negative x, because down here in this lower part, we have a positive x squared. We have 1, 2, 3 of the negative x's. And we also have a negative 1 hanging out. Now, these two get canceled, so what's left is 2 negative x and 1 negative 1, which is why all the results are this, but you should be able to figure that out from that part. It's more the sum or addition, which to me, now you lean towards this last one, right? But the problem is this is a negative 1, and that's a positive 1. So you could call this a subtraction, which when we subtract, that now becomes a positive, which is what happens here. That becomes a negative, which is what happens here. And that also becomes a negative, which is what happens here. So this one was a little bit tricky because you had to realize that the top one is a negative x squared and an x. The bottom one is an x squared and 3 negative x's and a negative 1. That's if you are adding. But we're not adding them because that's not one of the options with this minus 1 here. We're actually going to almost do a reverse keep, change, where if I had subtracted, that means all of these would have been the opposite sign. So that would be this choice down here. It's not super hard. You just have to be careful with all of your signs, really. If that doesn't help, please let me know. Maybe we could talk a little bit more in office hours type situation.